The night the snow swallowed Tongue River Valley, Bramwell Rusk was already out in it, riding his old horse along a sagging line of fence, hunting a few strays that had wandered off in the storm. He had done this same ride every winter for 11 years. He knew the smell of cold pine smoke, the sound ice made when it cracked under a hoof, the way the wind talked when nothing was wrong. Tonight, nothing about the wind sounded right. Far off across the white, there was a glow that did not belong to any cabin or campfire he knew. It burned low and red, fighting the snow instead of warming it. The air carried something sharp underneath the cold. Lamp oil, scorched wagon wood, and wet hay turning to smoke. Bram had smelled burning hay before. He had never liked the smell, and he liked it less now. He turned his horse toward it without deciding to. The snow near the ridge was no longer just snow. Long streaks of blood had frozen dark against the white, but there were almost no footprints beside them, as if whatever happened here had happened too fast for running. Near a shallow draw, his lantern caught the shape of a horse lying still on its side. Something about it was wrong, in a way Bram could not name at first. The snow over its belly was packed thicker than anywhere else on its body, smoothed down with care, not left to fall where it wanted. His old dog would not stop barking at that belly. Bram knelt down, lowered the lantern, and saw it. A thin ribbon of steam rising up through the snow, curling into the cold like breath from a mouth he could not see. Then he heard it, a sound too weak to be the wind, too small to be the dog. It was not the sound of an animal. It was the sound of a child trying not to cry. And out here, in a valley already bleeding into the snow, Bram had no way of knowing yet whether kneeling down to find out would save a life or cost him his own. Bram did not move for a moment. He only knelt there in the snow, listening, making sure his own heartbeat was not playing tricks on him. The sound came again, fainter this time, a breath caught somewhere between a sob and a whimper. He drew his knife and worked at the edge of the horse's belly. It had not been torn open by wolves, or by chance. Someone had cut it themselves, a rough, deliberate line, then pulled it closed again with strips of rawhide and packed snow over the same to seal in whatever warmth was left inside. The animal had not been dead long. Under the thick hide, blood still ran dark and wet, and heat still clung stubborn to the flesh, the last gift a dying horse could give. Bram pulled the cut wider. Warm air rose up into the cold like breath escaping a cave. Inside, curled against the animal's ribs, were two small bodies, pressed together so tightly it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. Their lips had gone the color of the sky just before full dark. He reached for the boy first. That was when a blade pressed flat and cold against his throat. A woman had risen up from beneath a horsehide draped over the carcass, where she had been lying half inside the warmth herself, shielding the children from the wind with her own body. She had not been sleeping. She had been waiting, knife ready, for whoever came next to be one more man who meant her harm. She did not ask for help. She did not thank him for the lantern light, or the hands reaching toward her children. She only asked one question, low and even, like she already expected the answer to be bad. "Who are you selling us to?" That question told Bram more than any confession could have. Cold had nearly killed her body, but men had taught her what to fear. Bram did not answer with words right away. He reached up with stiff fingers and untied the yellow bandana from around his own neck, then wrapped it gently around the boy's throat where the cold had bitten hardest. It was a small thing, but it was the only proof he had to offer in that moment that his hands were not the kind that sold children to anyone. The woman's blade did not fall away, but it lowered an inch. enough. Her name was Naya Red Willow, and what she told him next came out flat and exhausted, the voice of someone who had already cried everything she had to cry that night. Her camp had burned just after sundown, when the storm was thick enough to hide hoof prints, gun smoke, and the sound of men riding away. Not soldiers, not some old war finally come around again. White men, with torches and rifles, who had come for the horses and left nothing standing behind them. Their pony had taken a rifle round during the escape and carried them as far as the shallow draw before its legs finally gave out. Naya knew the children would not last another hour in the open, so she did the only thing left to do. She opened the animal, pushed the children into the last of its warmth, and pulled the hide over herself to keep the wind off them. Bram looked down at the dead animal that had spent its last warmth keeping 2 children alive, and he understood, in the marrow of his bones, that whatever had happened in that camp was not finished yet. It was only beginning to follow him home. If you have made it this far into this Montana snowstorm, take a slow breath right where you are. And if this story has already pulled you in, subscribe before we go any further, because what Bram does next will tell us whether one old man can still make right what he once left wrong. Bram did not waste time asking more questions out there in the open. He lifted the boy onto his saddle first, then helped Naya climb up behind him with the girl wrapped tight against her chest. The ride back to the ranch was slow and silent, broken only by the wind and the soft, ragged breathing of children too cold to cry anymore. He brought them in through the rear of the barn, away from the house windows, and settled them in the old hay room where he kept tack in summer. It was warm enough, hidden enough, and far from the road. He brought hot soup, dry blankets, and salve for skin gone white and waxy from the frost. Naya took none of it for herself until both children had eaten and stopped shivering. It was there, in the lantern light, that she told him the rest. And the rest was worse than fire, because fire at least had the decency to show its face. She had seen Deacon Voss and his men working over the stolen horses before the fire ever started, running a hot iron through the old Cheyenne brand and burning a new mark in its place. Voss had a contract to fill at Fort Keogh, horses promised to the Army on a deadline he could not meet. Coming up short on stock meant losing money, losing his name in Miles City, maybe losing the ranch he had built his pride on. So he had solved it the only way a man like Voss knew how: burn the camp. Take the horses, then make sure the only people left to argue about ownership were already wearing the word thief before they ever opened their mouths. Bram had barely finished hearing it when hooves came hard through the snow outside. Deputy Judd Carroll rode in with 2 armed men behind him, claiming they were chasing horse thieves and a few runaway Indians loose in the storm. Carroll's eyes moved slow across the yard, past the barn, and stopped on a thin trail of blood near the stable door. He asked Bram, plain and direct, if he was hiding anyone. Bram answered without blinking. Said he had seen nothing out there but snow, wind, and a few fool men chasing people through the dark on a night like this. Caro did not believe him, and he did not need to. He brought up the old story instead, the one Bram had spent years trying to bury, about the time he had stood by and said nothing while a band of Cheyenne took the blame for a crime that was never theirs. Caro used it now like a leash, reminding Bram exactly what kind of man he had once let himself be. But something in Bram had already shifted, quiet and final, somewhere between the cut in that horse's belly and the warmth still clinging to 2 frightened children. He had stayed silent once before. That single silence had cost him more sleep than any year of his life since. This time he was done staying quiet. Caro rode off into the storm, but Bram knew men like him well enough to understand that a no was never the end of the conversation. It was only the part before the trouble started. He moved through the barn that night, checking every door, every loose board, every place a man might come crawling through if he did not want to be seen coming. He did not wait long. Just past midnight, he heard the back door creak open slow, the sound of boots trying too hard to be quiet. Caro had found himself another hand in the dark, the kind of man who came cheap when the job was ugly. 3 of Caro's men slipped in through the rear, rifles low, eyes adjusting to the dark, hunting for a woman and 2 children they had been told were worth more dead than found. Bram was ready for them. He was no longer a young man who could win a fight with speed or a steady draw. He was old, heavy, and slow on his feet. But he had built this barn with his own hands 20 years back, and he knew every inch of it the way a man knows his own body in the dark. He cut the rope holding a sack of oats above the loft, and it dropped clean onto the first man's shoulder, driving him down hard enough to crack something in his arm with a sound that echoed off the rafters. The second man came in fast, and Bram looped a length of rope low across his path, yanking it taut at the last second. The man's boots left the ground entirely before his face met the wooden floor. When the third man came at him swinging a rifle like a club, Bram did not dodge. He turned his whole weight into the man instead, driving him backward into the stall wall hard enough to knock the breath clean out of his chest. It was not a clean fight. It was not a young man's fight. It was the fight of someone who had lived long enough to learn that winning rarely looks the way it does in stories. Naya did not stay hidden either. When one man lunged for the girl, she cut the rope holding the nearest horse, and the animal reared up, panicked, and slammed its full weight into him before he ever got close. By the time it was over, Bram had one man pinned and bleeding on the barn floor, and that man, scared enough to talk fast, told him everything. Voss had altered the brands. Voss had ordered the camp burned to erase the evidence. Voss had paid Caro good money to make sure no survivor lived long enough to tell a different story. And come first light, Voss intended to drive that altered herd straight through to Miles City, then carry forged papers to Fort Keogh as if none of this had ever happened. Bram understood then exactly what was at stake. If Voss made it through with those horses, every lie he had told would harden into something worse than a lie. It would become the law's own truth. And Bram knew there was no uglier lie in the West than one wearing a badge and carrying stamped paper. Take a moment here. Settle back into your chair, because what happens next in that snowstorm is the kind of thing you do not want to miss a single word of. What time is it where you are right now? And if you were standing in Bram's boots, with one man bleeding on your barn floor and dawn closing in fast, what would you do next? If this story has earned even a small piece of your evening, subscribe now so you never miss the next one. Because what a man chooses to risk for a stranger often reveals more about his decency than anything he could ever say out loud. Before first light, Bram hid the children in the old root cellar beneath the kitchen floor, telling them to stay quiet no matter what they heard above them. Then he and Naya rode out into the storm to find the one place Voss had to pass through on his way to Miles City, a narrow crossing near the Tongue River where the snow had drifted high on both sides. Voss came through with Caro and a handful of armed men, driving the stolen herd forward through the white, their altered brands hidden under a fresh dusting of snow. Bram did not have enough men to fight this head-on, so he did not try. He strung a row of lanterns along the fence posts, spacing them wide enough apart that Voss's men, half blind in the storm, would believe a dozen riflemen were waiting in ambush rather than just 2. It worked long enough. As Voss's men scattered to cover what they thought was a wider line of guns, Naya slipped along the fence and cut the lead rope on the bell mare, then slapped the rail hard enough to spook the rest of the herd. The horses bolted, screaming and wild, straight toward the road leading to Fort Keogh. Bram had counted on that road. Supply wagons used it even in bad weather, and bad men often forgot honest teamsters had eyes too. A group of teamsters and soldiers moving supplies that morning saw the herd come thundering past, and Bram made certain they saw something else too. Bram caught one of the stolen horses by the bridle, turned it broadside for the teamsters to see, and scraped snow from the brand. The fresh burn lay crooked and hot directly over the older Cheyenne mark beneath it. Boss's lie was no longer just a story men could deny. It was standing right there in the snow for anyone to see. Caro turned his rifle toward Naya, meaning to silence the one witness who could speak clearest against them. Bram threw himself into him before the shot could leave the barrel, and the two men went down together, hard into the drifted snow. Voss reached him first, driving Bram down beside the smoking ruin of an overturned wagon. Blood from a cut along his brow ran down and soaked into the yellow bandana still wrapped at his throat. But when Voss turned his pistol toward Naya, Bram found one more push left in his tired, heavy body and drove the man down onto the ice with everything he had. Naya picked up the fallen pistol. Her hand did not shake. For one long second, she wanted nothing more than to end it right there in the snow. Instead, she lowered the weapon. It was not mercy that stopped her. It was the understanding that a dead Voss could never be made to talk, and somewhere warm and untouched inside Fort Keogh, one crooked man behind a clean desk was still waiting, still believing himself safe. Caro vanished into the storm before anyone could stop him, but his voice carried back one last time through the wind. Voss was only ever the hired hand. The man who really wants you dead is still sitting warm at Fort Keogh. Naya and the two children stayed through the rest of that winter on Bram's ranch. She mended the torn yellow bandana with her own hands and returned it to him without a word of thanks needed. Bram never spoke of love. He simply gave her the warmest room in the house and kept dry firewood stacked beside her door every night without being asked. Naya never called it love either, but for the first time since the night her camp burned, she slept without a knife held ready in her hand. The next morning, Bram stepped out onto the porch and found fresh hoof prints cut into the snow along the ridge. Caro had not gone far, and the man who had truly set all of this in motion was still hidden behind a clean desk, waiting for the snow to bury every witness. That crooked brand under the snow is the part that sticks in my craw. A man can steal with a gun, sure. That's ugly enough. But there's a colder kind of stealing where he burns your mark off, puts his own on top, then waves a bill of sale like a church fan and expects decent folks to nod along. That ain't business. That's theft wearing Sunday clothes. And history had plenty of that rot. Up on the Crow Reservation near Garvin Basin, Crow cattle kept disappearing. Later, more than 750 head turned up with altered brands. One foreman even had papers for hundreds of cattle and claimed somebody else had done the dirty work. Ain't that convenient? Funny how a thief always finds paper when the truth starts sniffing around. Now, our story gave us Cheyenne horses and a woman named Naya. History gives us Crow cattle and men hiding behind paperwork. Different people, same stink. I don't trust a clean document when it's standing between a poor family and what was theirs. A brand is supposed to tell the truth. So is a badge. So is a man. But when all three lie, what's left for honest folks to do?